The scream came from the east wing, sharp and sudden, and Alina Ashworth froze at the top of the stairs, her cane trembling in her hand. She could not see who had screamed. She had not seen anything in 11 years. But she knew every creak of Ashworth Manor by heart, and that scream did not belong to any voice she recognized. Within seconds, footsteps rushed past her, and a servant muttered an apology before vanishing down the hall. When Alina asked her husband, Alistair, what had happened, his answer came too quickly, too smooth, like a line he had rehearsed. A maid had simply dropped a tray, he said. Nothing more. Alina had learned over the years never to question these small moments too closely. Blindness had taught her to trust the voices around her, because voices were all she had. Alistair described the color of the curtains, the expression on a guest's face, the state of the family's finances. Constance, his sister, read her letters aloud and helped her dress each morning. Alina's entire world had been built, brick by brick, out of other people's words. She could not check whether those words were true. She could only choose to believe them. But that night something shifted. Lying awake, Alina listened to the house breathe around her, the wind against the shutters, the distant clatter of dishes being cleared. She heard Alistair's voice in the hallway, low and urgent, speaking to Constance. She could not make out full sentences, only fragments. The words "debt" and "before she finds out" drifted through the wall, followed by a long, uneasy silence. Alina sat up in bed, her hands cold against the sheets. Finds out what, she wondered. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself this every night for years. But this time, the thought would not leave her alone. The next morning, Alina asked Constance directly whether anything was wrong in the household. Constance laughed softly and assured her that everything was perfectly fine, that Alina was imagining troubles where none existed. The reassurance was warm, familiar, and utterly convincing. And yet, for the first time, Alina noticed a slight delay before the laugh, a beat too long, as though Constance had needed a moment to decide how to respond. Small things like this had never mattered before. Now they gathered in her mind like clouds before a storm. Later that week, a letter arrived from a physician traveling through the county, a man named Marcus Wren, known for treating conditions once thought hopeless. Alina overheard the housekeeper mention his name to another servant, describing a rumor that Dr. Wren had restored sight to a farmer's son the previous spring. Alina's heart quickened. She said nothing to Alistair that day, but the seed had been planted, and she could not stop wondering whether darkness truly had to be permanent, or whether the truth she had trusted for 11 years was about to change forever. Alina sent for Dr. Wren without telling anyone in the house. She met him quietly in the small library, her hands folded tightly in her lap as he examined her eyes with careful fingers, and a strange metal instrument that clicked softly. He spoke gently, explaining that her blindness had likely come from pressure and scarring after her accident, not from any permanent damage to the eyes themselves. He believed a delicate procedure, combined with weeks of careful recovery, might restore at least partial vision. Alina felt something she had not felt in years, a fragile, dangerous kind of hope. When she told Alistair, his reaction surprised her. He did not celebrate the news. Instead, he grew quiet, then argued that the procedure was too risky, that she was better off content with the life she already had. Alina pressed him, asking why he seemed so unwilling to let her try. He softened his tone and claimed he only feared losing her to complications, but his hesitation lingered in her mind long after the conversation ended. Constance, when asked, offered a similar warning, urging Alina to consider the dangers rather than the possibilities. Despite their concerns, Alina decided to proceed. The surgery took place in a quiet room upstairs, away from curious servants, with only Dr. Wren and a trusted nurse present. Alina felt frightened, but she also felt something firmer than fear, a quiet determination to know the truth about her own life, whatever that truth turned out to be. The procedure itself passed in a blur of pressure and careful instruction, and afterward her eyes were bandaged tightly, and she was told to wait in complete darkness for several days. Those days felt endless. Alina lay in bed, listening to the house around her with new intensity, aware now that soon she might not have to rely on listening alone. She noticed things she had never paid attention to before: the uneven rhythm of Alistair's footsteps when he thought no one was near, the way Constance's voice changed when she spoke to the household accountant, quick and clipped, almost nervous. Alina began to wonder how much of her world had been shaped not by kindness, but by convenience. On the fifth day, Dr. Wren returned to check her progress and allowed the bandages to be loosened slightly. Alina blinked into a haze of gray light, unable to make out shapes, but aware, for the first time in over a decade, of brightness and shadow moving across her vision. She gasped quietly, tears slipping down her cheeks. It was not full sight, not yet, but it was proof that something was changing, and that change, she realized, could not be undone. Whatever waited for her beyond the darkness, she was already moving toward it, one careful step at a time. 2 weeks later, the final bandages came off completely. Alina sat in a chair by the window as Dr. Wren removed the last layer of cloth, warning her that her vision might take time to adjust and focus properly. When the light hit her eyes fully, she blinked rapidly, overwhelmed, and slowly the blurred shapes around her began to sharpen into something real. She saw her own hands first, thinner and paler than she had imagined. Then she saw the room, and what she saw made her breath catch in her throat. The library, which Alistair had always described as filled with rare books and polished shelves, was nearly empty. Dust covered half the remaining shelves, and several sections stood bare, as though books had been removed and never replaced. Alina said nothing at first, assuming perhaps this was simply one neglected room. But over the following days, as she quietly explored the manor with newly working eyes, the pattern repeated itself everywhere. Rooms she had been told were beautifully furnished stood dim and sparse. Portraits she remembered being described in loving detail were missing entirely from their frames, leaving faint outlines on the wallpaper where they once hung. Alina chose not to announce her recovery right away. Instead, she moved carefully through the house, wearing a light shawl over her eyes during the day and claiming her vision was still healing, still too sensitive for full activity. This gave her time to watch without being watched. She noticed Constance meeting privately with a stranger near the stables, exchanging a small leather pouch and folded papers. She noticed Alistair locking a drawer in his study each evening, glancing over his shoulder even though he believed she could not see him do it. The household accounts, when Alina finally found a chance to examine them herself, told a story entirely different from what she had been told for years. She had always believed the estate remained comfortable, even prosperous, based on what Alistair reported to her. Instead, the ledgers showed steady withdrawals, unexplained sales, and debts quietly building beneath the surface. Several entries referenced items sold at auction, heirlooms Alina remembered from childhood, pieces she had been told were still safely stored away for her someday. Each discovery added weight to a growing suspicion she did not want to believe. She thought of the whispered conversation she had overheard weeks earlier, the words debt, and before she finds out, and she understood now that those words had not been about protecting her. They had been about managing her, controlling what she knew and did not know, for reasons she was only beginning to understand. Alina realized that regaining her sight had given her something far more valuable than clear vision. It had given her the ability, finally, to see the truth for herself. Late one evening, Alina followed the sound of hushed voices to a small sitting room near the back of the manor, where a single candle burned low. Through the gap in the door, she watched Alistair and Constance seated close together, their heads bent over a stack of papers. Their conversation was quiet but urgent, and Alina pressed herself against the shadowed wall, listening carefully to every word. What she heard rearranged everything she thought she understood about her own life. Constance was not simply Alistair's devoted sister, as Alina had believed for over a decade. Their words revealed a closeness far deeper than family duty, a bond built on years of shared secrets and private affection. Together, they had been managing Alina's inheritance not to protect it, but to slowly drain it, selling heirlooms, forging her signature on documents she never saw, and diverting funds into accounts far from the estate. Elinor listened as Alastair mentioned a plan to have her formally declared unfit to manage her own affairs, a plan that would hand full control of the Ashworth fortune to him alone. Then came the detail that struck her hardest. Constance mentioned the night of the accident, the carriage crash that had taken Elinor's sight so many years ago, and referred to it as fortunate timing, as though it had solved a problem rather than caused a tragedy. Elinor's hands trembled against the wall as she tried to steady her breathing. She had spent 11 years believing her blindness was simply cruel misfortune. Now she wondered whether it had been something else entirely, a convenient accident that served someone else's purpose far more than it ever served her own. Elinor forced herself to stay calm, retreating quietly to her room before either of them noticed her presence. She sat alone in the darkness she once knew so well, her mind racing through every kind word Alastair had ever spoken to her, every gentle reassurance from Constance. She realized now that many of those moments had likely been calculated, designed to keep her comfortable, dependent, and unaware. The warmth she remembered from years of marriage now felt hollow, replaced by a cold understanding of just how thoroughly she had been managed. Rather than confront them immediately, Elinor understood she needed proof, allies, and a plan of her own. She thought of Dr. Wren, who had already proven trustworthy, and of her family's longtime solicitor in town, a man who had handled her late father's affairs and might still hold records untouched by Alastair's influence. That night, she wrote 2 careful letters by candlelight, her handwriting steady despite the storm inside her. She sealed them quietly, determined to send them at first light, knowing that once they were delivered, there would be no turning back from what she now intended to do. Over the following days, Elinor moved with quiet precision. She met secretly with the family solicitor, a careful man named Edmund Carter, who confirmed her worst fears after reviewing the estate documents she had copied by hand. Several signatures on major transactions were clearly forged, and the pattern of missing funds stretched back years. Dr. Wren, meanwhile, agreed to serve as a witness to her recovered sight, ensuring no one could later claim she was still incapable of managing her own affairs. Piece by piece, Elinor built a case sturdy enough to withstand whatever resistance Alastair and Constance might offer. She chose to confront them in the same sitting room where she had first learned the truth, standing in the doorway with her vision clear and her posture unshaken. Alastair looked up first, his expression shifting from surprise to alarm as he realized she was no longer wearing her shawl, no longer pretending to be anything other than fully sighted. Constance rose quickly, searching for words, but Elinor spoke first, her voice steady and calm despite the storm she had carried inside her for days. She told them plainly that she could see everything now, not only with her eyes, but with complete clarity about what had happened over the past 11 years. She revealed that Edmund Carter already held copies of the falsified documents, that Dr. Wren stood ready to confirm her full recovery to any court or family council, and that her letters had already reached trusted relatives outside the Manor's influence. Alastair attempted to argue, his voice rising, but Elinor did not waver. She reminded him calmly that darkness had once made her dependent on his words, but that dependence had ended the moment her sight returned. In the weeks that followed, Elinor reclaimed control of her inheritance through careful legal action, removing Alastair's authority over the estate and exposing the truth to the wider family. Constance left the manor quietly, unable to face the consequences of years of deception. Alastair remained, stripped of power, forced to live under the terms Elinor herself now dictated. The manor, once filled with hidden debts and empty rooms, slowly began to change under her direction, restored piece by piece, much like her own sense of self. Elinor often stood by the same window where her bandages had first come off. Watching sunlight spread across gardens, she could finally see with her own eyes. She understood that regaining her sight had cost her more than she ever expected, shattering the comfortable illusions she had lived within for over a decade. Yet she also understood that clarity, however painful, was worth more than any comfortable lie. For the first time in 11 years, Alina Ashworth saw her life exactly as it was, and she intended to build whatever came next entirely on her own terms.